Mini book haul collector diary. Today's focus. Is there a focus to this? Well, I guess you could say it's variant titles and editions, because it just so happens that some of the things I picked up recently are books which often had different titles in previous editions, what have you, just coincidentally. So we'll just sort of go through them and really introduce you to the wonderful world of the VT, as the Science Fiction Encyclopedia calls it, the variant title, because it is a thing and it's part of the body of knowledge that the SF collector and reader needs to build up to maintain their kudos in an ever crowded marketplace. Let's get comfier here, and we're in the hideout. As you can see, we've got some wacky lighting, not quite as cosmic swirly as last time. We begin with an unusual one, and this is something that I've been meaning to pick up for some time, and I managed to acquire one the other day. And this is let's see, it's a tour double. It's the very first ever tour double. These are from late 80s, early 90s. Let's have a look at the date. And it's from, let's see, what year is it? Well, it gives you the copyright, 1988, and it's a DOS chapbook. So you've got one book on the front, another on the back, rather like an ace double. And later on, they dropped this and they just put the one after the other. And the basic idea of this series after a while was that you had a vintage work of SF and you sort of meshed it with something that was related, that was contemporary. It doesn't quite come off in this, but it's the right ballpark. So as you can see, that wonderful gold embossing there, and broken spine, the usual Outlaw bookseller standard. And this is A Meeting with Medusa by Arthur C Clarke, which I think was published in the 70s. Let's have a look again. Bear with me. 1971, it was in Playboy magazine of all things. It's got a remainder punch there, but very, very nice. And on the back, it's got Green Mars. Now, that's where you're getting interested, I can see, because Green Mars, this is not the novel Green Mars. This is the novella Green Mars, and it's a different thing completely. Okay, same title, different thing completely. How confusing, I hear you say. Now, it could be worse. We could be talking about Adam Roberts' book Swiftly, and Adam Roberts has written two books called Swiftly, which is, that's Adam all over, and messing with our heads. And apart from this rather huge barcode, that's quite handsome, I think you'll agree. So I decided to go for this because I don't normally get on with Kim, but this is an interesting little oddity, and I remember my friend Simon talking about it at the time, and I thought I'll give it a go because I can handle him at novella length. And the same with Clarke. I don't really like Clarke's style, though I've been collecting him for nostalgia reasons, and this is a short one. And funnily enough, there is a sequel to this story written by, let me see, it was Al Reynolds and Stephen Baxter, I think, and I just happen to have Internet Science Fiction Database in front of me, and let me just see if we can find it, because I just want to confirm that. So let's see what comes up, and we'll get a heck of a lot, of course, because I know Medusa's in the title. So if we go forward, and yeah, there's a heck of a lot, so I'm not going to page through all that and keep you waiting. But yeah, there was a sequel written by Baxter and Reynolds, I'm pretty sure, and I'm going to try and pick that up and read that as well, because I don't normally read this sort of hard SF, but now and again one has to challenge oneself and look at the mainstream of things. But I think you'll find that's rather gorgeous, isn't it? So the Green Mars, which isn't Green Mars, if I put it the right way round, that might help. Not the novel, but the novella, totally different. So there you go, fascinating stuff, eh? Then we move on to an old favourite of mine, the very wonderful G Ballard. And even though I've got a fantastic collection of Ballard first hardcovers, there's some of the old sort of paperbacks I've been picking up gradually the last couple of years, and they're getting more and more collectible, especially in A format. The hardest ones to get are the ones from the late 70s in Panther, like Crash and High Rise, and you can find them, but they're often in a state. But I managed to pick this one up the other day, and I got this from Dorset Bob, who popped in the post for me. Thanks, Bob. This is The Overloaded Man. Now, this is interesting because this is a short story collection which no longer exists, except it does. Now, if I look at the contents of this, now The Overloaded Man was kind of remixed and resorted out in the late 70s when it was republished with slightly different content as The Venus Hunters. Now, I do have a paperback of The Venus Hunters down there, but this is the hardcover edition from 1985. In 1985, Ballard had just about missed out on winning the Booker Prize for Empire of the Sun. So there were 2 tranches of reissues, 8 books altogether, 4 from Gollancz, and this is from the Gollancz ones, and 4 from Jonathan Cape, and I bought them all the time. I got them all signed by JGB back in the 90s. And the Venus Hunters has pretty much the same content as the Overloaded Man, with a few exceptions. Like, for example, the Overloaded Man is not in the Venus Hunters. And there's also a story called Passport to Eternity, which in this book is called, I think, 13 to Centaurus. So they changed the title even of the short stories. And I think that happened before that. But that's just to give you an idea of the detail of bibliography one has to go into. There's also an essay in this, which is not in this. So they're about 90% the same. And this is the first edition, and it's signed, as I say. So this is a first this. So the true first of this would be a paperback from the late 70s, but this is the first hardcover, so it's the first this. This indicates that it's the first printing of a particular edition, but not the true first printing per se, because as I've said before, we use this term edition and we should say first printing to mean first edition. So there you are, very handsome, I think you'd agree. And I was very pleased to get that because I didn't have this title in my collection. And with Ballard, there are a few books which are harder to find. This is one of them. This will set you back usually between about 20 and 40 pounds, and quite hard to come in this sort of nick, quite good. And funnily enough, the Overloaded Man itself ended up in this Gollancz reissue from the same year, from 85, and this is The Voices of Time. The Voices of Time includes The Overloaded Man, so, and also 13 to Centaurus. So I'm not sure if I'm right about that. So you see, these things get shuffled around. And if you look at American editions of Ballard, they're even more different again. I mean, the American edition of The Terminal Beach is very, very different to the UK one. So that's sort of quite interesting. So you do have to look at the details. Why do these things happen? Very often, I think it's because the stories have appeared in magazines and there's rights issues and what have you, and authors get involved, editors get involved, they want to change things. And, you know, it's also a handy way of getting people to buy the material again, which is nice. If you're collecting Ballard, one of the rarest books is a Orbit paperback from the late 70s called The Best of G Ballard, which I've only ever seen once in a really bad state, and it's really hard to find. You just cannot find it anywhere. You just had one printing and people have hung on to it. It's a shame that it wasn't printed multiple times. So there you go. So that's The Overloaded Man. Bit of Ballard there, and 2 of the first from that period. And the short stories are really, really important. I think if I just look at Voices of Time again, I think this began life as a different book as well. Let me just have a look. Yes, so this book was for this. So this is a first this again, because its original edition was published in 1963 by Gollancz again, but it was then called The 4-Dimensional Nightmare. Okay, 4-Dimensional Nightmare. But again, I think the content was slightly different, because 4-Dimensional Nightmare was also done as a paperback, I believe. I'm sure there is a paperback, and that I think is the only sort of title. That and The Best of G Ballard are the only 2 I don't have in my collection, so I'm looking out for decent copies of both of those. And I would collect American editions of Ballard if I felt I could afford them, but you know, it's hard. You know, you've got to draw the line somewhere. You don't have to, but you know, if you haven't got the money, you should. So that's a bit of Ballard to get you going. Then somebody who I am thinking of doing some rereading of soon, because I haven't read any for ages, is Philip Jose Farmer. And Farmer, of course, is best known for the Riverworld books, not essentially his best books. I did a video on the channel some time ago called Metafictional Pulp Genius, about his Wool Newton stories, which are essentially pastiches of other people's work. This is probably his most famous and best-selling single book, To Your Scattered Bodies Go, which is really good. It's got a very tortuous history, which I'll talk you through when I do something about this series, because I am going to do something about this series, because it tends to fall by the wayside. It did really well. It was his sort of popular best-selling thing, but it's not always people's favourite. But I do think it has hidden depths, which are not hidden exactly, but they get lost in the action-adventure idea of this. And this is a great book. I really recommend this. And on that front, something I picked up very recently, you'll see a lot of Farmer at this mini haul, is this book, which is The Dark Design. And this is the UK 7 House hardcover. the Dark Design, and the Dark Design is the third of the Riverworld books. There are 5. There are some adjuncts, some extra things which we'll talk to when I do a video about the whole series. And I bought this. This is a strange one because Seventh House, if you watch the channel a long time, you know I've got a bit of a fetish for Seventh House, a real penchant for them. And they're still going, but they used to do a lot of books in hardcover the 70s and 80s for libraries, and this was the only one of this series they did, but I decided to pick it up from Dorset Bob because I just love their books. I just love these books, and I've got very, very happy memories of actually stocking these. Most of them went to libraries, but I used to get them to the bookshops that I worked in, and I would sell them to ordinary members of the public passing by. Philip K. Dick, for example, in hardcover. You know, these great books which are out in paperback, but people wanted hardcovers. You could sell a few copies. So yeah, I got that. It's really nice. You see the Riverworld books quite a lot in hardcover in the UK. They're usually American editions, particularly the first 4, and they've got blue jackets, and they look dreadful. They're always in a mess. And, you know, everybody seems to struggle to actually sell them when they've got them secondhand, largely because the production values are low. But Seventh House had really high production values, so this is really, really nice. So I'm pleased to get that. So that's part of my Seventh House collection. Just to show you, this is what the paperback looks like. There you go. And that's a Granada one, so that's a pre-85 edition. And I'm going to show you something interesting about this. As you see, this has got a toned text block. It's sprayed green. Now, that's not an uncommon thing in the USA, but this is a British paperback. British paperbacks were not ever, in my experience, toned like this, sprayed like this, especially once you get to the 70s, 80s. There might have been some in the 60s, but I don't think it was ever a thing in the UK. Now, how is that like that? Because as you see, it's done professionally. Well, I'll tell you how. I got this from Fantastic Literature, Simon Gosden, and I've bought quite a few books of Simon, and I was asking him to put a list together for me of things he has, because that spray there, that staining of the text block in that colour, it doesn't have a particular colour, some of them are red. What it means is that this is a file copy. This sat in the publisher's office before they had a digital file. This was their reference copy. And I do like file copies, so I've got a bit of a thing about collecting them. So really, really nice. And of course, I used to have this in, you know, same cover, different, slightly later edition back in the early 80s when I first read these. But yeah, so file copy, interesting thing. So you see the Dark Design there. 2 versions, and as I say, there will be a lot more Farmer on the channel. So while we're on Farmer, and just going through this little haul, I'll talk about a few things, and I picked a few more things up. And a while ago, this is a book I had years ago, got rid of, because I got rid of a lot of the works which I felt were more routine, and this is one of them. This is Two Hawks from Earth. Look at that cover. It's sort of Vallejo-esque. Is it Vallejo? Let's have a look. Yeah, it is. It's got Boris written on it, Boris Vallejo, and I have shown this on the channel before. And Two Hawks from Earth, great title. Unfortunately, the title isn't quite as imaginative as you'd hope. Two Hawks is the name of the character, who is obviously of native Indian descent, Roger Two Hawks. And Roger Two Hawks thought he probably bought it when he bailed out of his flaming bomber. That's a typical Farmer opening, that he bought the farm as he bailed out of a flaming bomber. And, you know, Farmer does that in Lord of the Trees, where Lord Grandrith, Greystoke, Tarzan jumps out. You know, the book begins with him falling to his death. Brilliant, absolutely fantastic. So it's action and adventure writ large. And, you know, if it actually been about two hawks from the planet Earth, I think it'd be slightly different and more interesting. But that's that one. But just to show you, here's another example of a variant title. And this is the original version of that book when it was called The Gate of Time. Okay, and this is a, let's see, now I got this from Bob, 1970 Belmont Tower First. That cost me 4 notes, except it didn't because Bob gives me a discount. So he gave me about, let me see, he would have knocked off, let's work it out, that would have been about £3.50 for me. And as you see, it's quite slim. So expanded, retiled and expanded. There you go. So Gate of Time, Two Hawks from Earth. So you see the VT thing coming in there? Know your variant titles. Now, once you get past a certain date, once you get past the sort of mid-70s, variant titles are uncommon. Often books will have a different title in the States to the UK. Often they're dumbed down for the USA, which I think is terribly insulting. That doesn't sort of happen anymore. You get the odd example now and again, but it's very, very unusual for that to happen now. So, but it used to be a very common thing, and often with the SF magazines, editors would change the titles of stories and novels, and often because the writer was selling the item, they couldn't do anything about it. But it's a bit of it's not naughty really, isn't it? So don't interfere with the creativity, guys. Then a bit more Farmer. Now, of course, PJF was quite well known for doing things which were ribald, and this book has the word ribald on the cover, and this is an edition of this book I used to have. I've had, I think, 3 or 4 different editions of this book, and I've got other ones aside, but I love these Panther covers and I'm recollecting. This is not a Panther oblate, but this is one of Farmer's most famous singletons, and this is Flesh, and I think you'll agree that is a cracking bit of artwork there, isn't it? Isn't that great? Guy with the antlers, and that is relevant to the plot. And this isn't quite as shocking as people would think. It is quite funny. It's actually a pretty satirical novel, and I've been reading some Farmer criticism really, and it's really brought home to me how a lot of things in his work, because they're action adventure oriented, are very easy to miss if you don't close read. So I'm not essentially going to reread this one, but I'm going to reread some other ones, because this isn't one of my favorites. It's okay, but it's not as great as it should have been. I think he was held back by the times, and when he did his more ribald stuff later on in the 70s, that's really, really quite something. That's almost his best work. So there you go, that's Flesh in Panther. And speaking of ribald things, this is a book now which fetches quite a lot of money, and I used to sell this, and it was a B format in the 80s, and this is the second book of a loose trilogy. It's really a diptych with a volume tacked on the end, which is very little to do with the first 2. This is the second book in the series An Exorcism, and this is Blown, and this is the quartet edition from the mid-70s. This is the sequel to The Image of the Beast, and as you see, this is a very ribald cover, and that's a Jim Burns there, and that actually does depict the scene from the book. And I've always remember selling this, and the Granada edition in the 80s used to say it was about a cadre of sex-mad werewolves and vampires, and a detective character who's called Harold Child, which is a reference to Lord Byron. Childe Harold from The Dark Tower Went, something like that. It's from one of Byron's epic poetry. So Farmer stuff is loaded with these literary references. He really well-read man, and he really understood all this stuff. And I think you'll agree that's a cracking cover. And these days, this will set you back at least £15. I didn't pay that much for it. Again, he said smugly. But I got a deal from Mr. Bob. And again, this is one to watch out for. The first book in the series, Image of the Beast, is actually very hard to find these days, because they developed a kind of reputation, and that has quite a shocking opening sequence which will make your hair stand on end, particularly if you're male, because it involves well, we won't say what it involves, but it usually makes men flinch, quite honestly, so I'll leave that to your imagination. And then there's a third book called Traitor to the Living, which is only tangentially related to the first 2, so there you go. So if you ever see this in any form, snap it up. And what a title, he's not messing around there, is he? So that's Farmer for you. Do we have any more Farmer? We have one more, because today I completed my collection in hardcover of the Fantasia Press editions of the World of Tears series, and this is Behind the Walls of Terror, and Fantasia, really nice publisher. These are hard to find in good nick. You find them in bad condition. It's the only one I didn't have. There are 5 in the World of Tears series. There are 2 later ones, but they're not in the same ballpark, and they're not as good, so I would pass over them. And I am going to do a video about this series because it needs reappraisal, and this was very much Farmer's pocket universe thing, and Farmer sort of claims in some of his own writing that he pretty much invented the pocket universe as a concept in SF. But, maybe other people got to it before him. He thought it up in the 1930s when he was a kid, and he didn't actually get right. He drew maps and everything of the pocket universe world which is in this. And, you think of pocket universes at the moment, Dave Hutchinson is kind of the king of it. And, he does that in The Villages and in a series of his. Absolutely brilliant, very subtle, very witty, possibly influenced by Farmer, but quite a different sort of writer, because he's quite English, and Farmer, of course, is very American. But I can see how Dave would read Farmer and would sort of maybe get off on that. Something that's been mentioned a couple of times recently, Matt at Book Pill mentioned him a while ago because he had a book haul with a load of books by him that he was selling on, is Jack L. Chalker. And recently Matt Defoe at Science Fiction Reads, and then John at Sci-Fi Scavenger, both brandish copies of Jack L. Chalker's series, or books from the series, the Well World series from the mid-80s, which I remember reading new in Penguin when they came out. I was attracted by their melodramatic titles. And Exiles of the Well of Souls, The Return of Nathan Brazil. And they're very like these in lots of ways. They're sort of in between these and Piers Anthony. And I see Piers Anthony and Chalke both been influenced by Farmer, except Farmer's a far superior writer. But not so essentially more material, grittier and earthier. I would say that Farmer's very earthy and he's sort of more literary than the other guys as well. So yeah, I was pleased to get that. And I'll show you all of those at some point when we do a video about it. And I'll show you paperbacks as well and talk about where World of Tears comes up in rock music, which some of you will know. Then I did something which I don't normally do, and that's a hardcover upgrade. I very, very rarely do this. I can think of 2 other books in my library which I would like to upgrade. Another one is by the author I'm going to talk about, and one of them is a book by Michael G. Coney, which has laminate ripped off the front of the jacket, and this gives me pain every time I see it, and I must pick up a decent one because I could do that. And that's a book called The Girl with the Symphony of the Fingers, which in Door was called The Jaws That Bite, The Claws That Catch, and my copy of that's been an embarrassment for years. But I upgraded to a new second-hand copy of The Grain Kings by Keith Roberts. I think you'll agree that Chris Foss cover is just the absolute business, isn't it? Look at that. And I got this, and it does have a little bit of sticker residue around the back, which I need to do something about. But my own copy had a closed tear there, and that's on eBay at the moment. Very, very rare book, and a really good book of short stories, some fantastic stuff in this, published by Hutchinson in the mid-70s. Very beautiful. The only other book I'd really like to upgrade is my copy of The Chalk Giants by Keith Roberts, which is just an amazing book and is really hardcore. And I've mentioned it in my Roberts videos. There's a Roberts video which uses this as the thumbnail, and that's the one where I go to the locations in Perverse and the Chalk Giants. So if you haven't watched that, do watch it, because it was a big shoot. It's mostly outside. I go to the locations, talk about those books, talk about the theories as well, and yeah, absolutely lovely. So I'm pleased to do that. My copy of the Chalk Giants is just in such a state, but that's an even rarer book in good nick. You can get the US hardcover quite easily, but that's boulderized. It's sliced to pieces. There's an awful lot of things taken out of it. Last but one for the moment is this book, The Last Legends of Earth by A.A. Attanasio, in the Bantam Spectra A format edition. This is the final volume of the Radix Tetrad. If you've never read Radix, I've said this before, you need to. It's abrasive, psychedelic, strange, unforgettable. It's one of the tastiest books you'll ever try. I mean, if you're one of these people who's a real foodie who likes trying unusual food, you know, well, Radix is kind of the equivalent of that in science fiction terms. And I haven't got my paperback out. And the thing is with these is they were only published in the UK in B format, and I hate the B format covers. So we're trying to get A format ones. I won't get the A format of Radix because I'm very fond of it and I like the cover, but I don't like the cover designs of the second, third and fourth, because they came quite a while afterwards and it's completely bonkers. So I'm trying to get A's. So I'm missing one now. I'm missing Arc of the Dream in A format. They're very hard to find in the UK, so I'm very pleased to get that. And I would say if you're not familiar with Attanasio, do check him out. Radix is a really collectible book in hardcover. I'd love a copy. It wasn't published in hardcover in the UK. It's always very expensive. It's usually in the State, but it is phenomenal. So maybe one day I'll try and pick one up. If I ever see one, that'll be it. So that's The Last Legends of Earth. And these are sort of really cosmic and absolutely indescribable. Stuff in this happens over billions of years, and it's really hard to describe. So I'm not even going to try, but I will review Radix on the channel because nobody ever talks about it, and it's years since I've read it, so I need an excuse to go back to it. I skip read some of it a few years back, trying to get the feeling back, and it was really interesting. One of those writers who is difficult and flawed at times, but other times just flies. Finally, this is a mainstream novel. This is Len Dayton's Close Up, and I came across this in a bookshop in Marlborough that I visit, which is about 30 miles from me, and I thought, gosh, I'd forgotten that one. I forgot that was on the list, and so I got one into work because we didn't have one in stock, and they put them in these nice Penguin Modern Classics. This is a thriller set in the film industry, because normally, of course, he wrote
spy stories. The Ipcress File is one of the wonderful spy novels anybody could ever read or write. And he wrote a Hitler Wins alternative history called SSGB, which is terrible. I've tried to read it 4 or 5 times. I really don't think he nails it at all. Otherwise, he's a marvelous writer. And I love the idea of this. So this is about a fading movie star who's going to have a biography written, and he thinks it's going to reboot his career. And I thought that would be a nice palette cleanser. So that's the end of this little haul. We've talked a bit about variant tiles, and we will be going back to longer form videos with themes quite soon. It's just, you know, I'm exhausted still after Christmas, and I haven't been well, as you know. So that will happen. So this is like a filler again. Hope you've enjoyed that. And as I say, a bit later in the year, we'll do quite a bit on Farmer. So I hope you're looking forward to that. Stay well, everybody. Thanks for all the kind comments, the super thanks for all the views. It's just absolutely wonderful to be on the receiving end of all this love. Thank you very much indeed. And this is Steve Andrews, Outlaw Bookseller, signing off for now. Bye.